Well, welcome everyone. Apologies for being a minute or two late to start. And I'll do a couple of minutes blurb intro, partly to introduce ourselves and what you've signed up for, but also gives other people a chance to join us. So welcome to this webinar, which is part of the Getting Started in Clinical Education Research series. We meet every month by webinar, and actually on the website, the previous presentations are there, and actually the future ones are there as well from previous years. And this time we're looking at reviewing the literature. We've looked at how to, an intro to med-ed research and research questions, and then future webinars will look at methodologies, data analysis, writing up, ethics, PPI, all sorts of interesting stuff. So do have a look on the website, or have a look on the last slide that we'll show today. We'll direct you to the place to register for future webinars. My name's Hugh Alberti. I am a GP in Middlesbrough and Professor of General Practice Education at Newcastle University, chairing most of these sessions on behalf of the incubator. And really pleased to say that we've got Dr. Stelling speaking to us today about getting started in reviewing the literature, and she'll introduce herself when she starts. A couple of other things just to mention during the talk part, then we'd suggest that you mute yourself and switch off your video. But then after the presentation, there'll be a chance for questions and answers, which we'll either do as a big group or in small groups, depending on numbers. But at that time, then feel free to unmute if you've got any questions, and feel free to put your video on as well so we can see that you're there. If you have questions during the presentation, then feel free to use the chat box. And the other thing we encourage people to do from now on the chat box is, if you're happy to, then just could you share on the chat box who you are and where you work. We won't have a chance to go around everyone, which would be much nicer, more interesting, but we could at least do it via chat box. And then you might find, oh, look, there's someone in the office next to me who's on this same webinar, and we can see whether we can encourage some collaboration, etc. The other brief things just to mention are that the slides and a recording of this will be available within the next week or two on the website, so we don't need to send them directly to you. And also, if you want a certificate to prove that you've attended, then please could you email us, and any feedback on the session would be welcome. We'd be happy to hear from you as well. And again, we'll show the email address, which will probably, will go up in the chat box, and also we'll show that at the end of the session. I think that's the end of my blurb. The talk presentation will be about half an hour, but as I said, feel free to put questions in the chat box in the meantime. And then into that, there'll be a chance for discussion either as a big group or in small groups. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Heidi. Over to you.
Thank you, and welcome everyone. I'm delighted to be offering this presentation for the third year in a row, and it's worked brilliantly in previous years, and you guys have asked loads of questions, so that's brilliant. So I'm Dr. Heidi Stelling. I am an obstetrician and gynecology trainee in the Northeast, and currently I'm a clinical research fellow undertaking my PhD at Newcastle University. So proviso to start, technology isn't my forte, and all the QR codes aren't active. So Marta is very kindly going to bail me out at the end, and she's going to give us the most active up-to-date QR codes. Ooh, right, let's see if we'll move. Right, so overview of the session that I'm going to deliver today. Again, Hugh, as he mentioned, will be manning the chat, so please do put your questions in there. If it's desperately burning and you really want to ask us a question and stuff, please do. I'm happy to be interrupted. I'm not easily put off. But if you can save it at the end, then we can generate some discussion for you guys all to have together. That would be fine too. And I'm happy to flick back through the slides if there's something you wanted to see. So the overview of the session that I'm going to deliver today is talking about the design of literature reviews, the conduct of them, the analysis of them, and how you would write them up. Okay, and this is all designed for someone who's getting started in reviewing the literature. Before we start, the topic of this presentation is called reviewing the literature, but I want to make the difference, or I want to differentiate these two concepts for you. So there's reviewing the literature, and a literature review. Now, reviewing the literature is perhaps something that you're all familiar with. It can be biased. It's when you might pick and choose what literature suits your argument. So you'd write it in the introduction to a paper. You wouldn't methodically and systematically go through all of the literature available to you. You would pick the bits that best justified your argument or your point. That's obviously, designed for an entirely different purpose to literature reviews, which are a systematic process designed to give a balanced view of the literature out there, identify gaps and identify areas for further research. Okay, so you've got to differentiate those two things in your mind. So this is design, the first section that we're going to deal with here, and it's going to be split into 6 sections. What do you want to know? Like all research projects, it always starts with a question. What is the point? Why are you doing this? What type of search you might do, how you would go about registering your review, your search terms you might use, the databases you could access, and your inclusion exclusion. And all of this is governed around your research questions. All right, the whole purpose, like I know we'll bang on about it all the time, but you've got to know what you're looking for. This isn't looking for a needle in the haystack, and if you do that, you will drive yourself insane extracting more data than you ever need to know. So you only ever extract what you're going to use to answer your research questions. If you suddenly think of a new research question, fabulous, that's a new project. Or if you want to add a new one, you can do that later down the line, but it does mean revisiting everything. So we would strongly suggest sitting down with your supervisory team and working out your research questions and the aim of your study before you get started. So to that end, research questions. What is already known? So is there something out there? What is known in the literature at large? That can be literature. There's more flex nowadays with what do stakeholders think. You can do stakeholder engagement before you even get going as to what is known out there. What do you know from your personal practice and experience? What are the gaps in the literature, and why do you want to know? So what are you going to do with this? There shouldn't be research waste. Okay, it's bad. Bad for the environment, running all these searches in big search engines, and it's bad for us. We should be using our time wisely and answering questions that have purpose. So moving on, the types of search you might do. Now, I know this is hideous, so just bear with it. But well, it's hideous, but it's quite pretty, actually. So there's lots of ways that you can look at this, and this is a little tree of reviews. This isn't mine. I stole it from somewhere else, so the references at the bottom. You will get all these slides, and there's lots of little handy references and tips and hints in the notes section. But reviewing has become a massive thing because partly to reduce research waste and partly because lots of different people do different things, and a review isn't just about reporting what everyone else has done. It's about connecting the dots and bringing or making something better than the sum of its parts. So that's called synthesis. Okay, so taking things and bringing them together to make something different. The ones that are most commonly used would be systematic review, meta-analysis, which you'll all be quite familiar with from your sort of quantitative lives. If the medics that are out there or healthcare workers that are out there, we tend to be sort of indoctrinated into more quantitative methods. But in a qualitative world, there's more and more things coming out. Scoping reviews are very popular. If you open any med-ed journal at the moment, you're going to see scoping review. They often always quote Arksey and O'Malley, although there's other people that have sort of proposed a framework out there. And this is a great. So each one of these reviews will have a different way of doing things because they have a different purpose. Okay, so my research interest is realist work, and I do a lot of realist synthesis, and that's a very different way of looking at literature. It's pulling literature out, and it's sort of diving into theory and looking for context mechanism, outcome configurations within that. Whereas a scoping review would be looking at the breadth and depth of the literature. So you need to pick the type of review that will get you the answer you want. And it's back to the research question. What is the gap? What are you trying to what is the question you are trying to answer? So each of them will have their own little guidance or framework. A narrative review, I've highlighted that this year actually because up until when I've delivered this last year, I'd predominantly worked within the ones I'd highlighted, but I've done a bit more doing a few more narrative reviews this year. And again, there's a paper in the notes section from Greenall, I think, who talks about sort of a system for narrative review and making it transparent and making it robust in the way that you approach it. And this is a really beautiful type of review because it can bring in lots of different paradigms or lots of even interdisciplinary currently working. So the one I've done most recently was between history, but you can bring in economic view, you can bring in social view, political views, and bring that all together to sort of give a different framing of the literature that we know, and use it to identify gaps and patterns to move forward. Right, so before you do anything, once you've got your research questions, your aims, your objectives, and you know what you want to do, you should register your protocol, okay? There's various ways to do this. NIHR uses Prospero, so that's their sort of repository, and they don't take scoping reviews. So they essentially take systematic reviews. Occasionally they will take realist reviews. This is essentially just a big form that you fill in, which goes on their website. And I like to think of it like a recipe, okay? So you're sitting down and you've worked out exactly what you want to do. I love a cooking metaphor and a baking metaphor, but you've worked out exactly what you want to do, and that is like going to make you the perfect cake. But actually on the day you get there and ooh, you've run out of brown sugar, and you have to sort of, you know, work it out, add it in, sort it out differently. And that's fine. So you've got the recipe that you ideally wanted, you uploaded it onto your protocol, onto your repository, and then when you came to do the research, it was slightly different. That's okay within reason. Obviously, you can't do something completely different, but if you wanted to make little changes because you didn't have that, or that wasn't available, actually this was available and it was much better, then that's fine, but you need to justify that in your final product, okay? So when you wrote up your final paper, you would say the deviations from the protocol were X, Y, and Z because of X, Y, and Z. OSF, so I personally have used Prospero for readers reviewing, but I've put all my scoping reviews on OSF. Again, it's very similar type of repository. You fill in all the questions and it uploads it onto here. And then you can continue to sort of go back to it and say that you know, finished data collection, or you can make amendments to it within this system. So now we've registered it, we've committed, we want to define our search terms. Now, realistically, like everything in meta research, these aren't necessarily a linear process. Often you will need a search strategy. It might not be finalized, it might not be divided within all the different databases, but you will need a search strategy to upload your protocol. But to define your search terms, you need to define your question. We're back to the realist question. And then you need to break it down, okay? So you need to break it down into what concepts constitute that question and the synonyms of those concepts. And consider how each of these will work in each different database, okay? And I'm going to come back to that. It is commonplace to publish a strategy now, so you will have to show your workings out, just like in school, and that is often uploaded as a supplementary document to your paper, your final paper, which is brilliant because it helps people like us when we're learning to see how other people have broken these questions down, or how other people have used different search terms in the database. I would highly recommend, I love working with other people, and I would highly recommend meeting and involving yourself within your librarian team. I've learned so much from our librarian team, and they're always really accessible, and in my experience, they're always really excited to help and sort of hear about your research and learn new things. And they will help you try and design a search strategy that will get you the answers to the questions that you're looking for. So I put this in here, I think following our first session, because the idea of breaking things down into concepts was bothering people. And I think it is sort of an unusual transition. Some research questions just lend themselves totally to an answer, and especially ones that are maybe a bit more niche, because you're not going to get 100,000 results. But if you've got a phenomenon that is much more widely spanning, you do have to think really carefully about how you're going to narrow that down to a manageable amount of hits without losing things that may be useful. You can trial and error this in the first instance. So sometimes we run a search and we'll pick out, right, well, these are the papers that I would have said in the first 100 hits are really, really, seminal papers for this question. Why are they coming back in this hit? And look at so every hit you get on a database will give you why it's come back. So mesh terms or keywords that have flagged for it to be pulled through as a hit, and work out or adapt your research strategy around that. And then you can go back and sort of amend it to make sure that you're definitely getting those, or check in your final search strategy that you definitely picked up those papers that you identified as seminal. But some people like a bit of a framework, and that's fine. Many of you will be aware or familiar with PICO. That's the, I'm going to get it wrong now, Population Intervention Comparison and Outcome, that we'll really commonly use in quantitative research. SPIDER is an equivalent in qual, but like many things in qual, we will say it's almost trying to be more like quant, and it doesn't need to have a framework. You can be more flexible, okay? So sometimes I've done papers where I've said, it's informed, our search strategy was informed by PICO. So we thought about what the population might be or the intervention, but we're not going to have a comparison because actually we just want, the whole purpose is to just look at sort of the whole breadth of what's out there. So it can be informed by loosely and you can pick it out loosely. But you will find that a lot of your repositories where you register your protocols are very quant focused. So they might ask you these questions. So don't be scared. It's free text, okay? A lot of them you don't have to, tick a box. So you can just loosely say it was informed by PICO and these were the reasons. As long as you can rationalize and justify why you've done what you've done or the risks, potentially limitations in doing what you've done, then you're fine. But if you want to use Spider, there it is. Right. Databases, a note on databases. This was a little insight that a librarian gave me when I was quite early doors, and it's really helped the way that you think about designing or understanding databases. So there's loads of databases out there, okay? And I remember when I first came to this thinking, oh my word, there's just so many. And I mean, this is just like a snapshot. There's loads of different things out there. But you've got to think about what these databases base themselves on. The ones that you use in terms of sort of Medline, PubMed, Scopus, I'll just go for the top line initially, is how you access them. This is the medium in which you use to access these things. But they all use in turn another database, which is the US National Library of Medicine for the top three is them. So that's why they're all highlighted in yellow. So they all use that database, but you access it in different ways. For example, PubMed, you might ask a question to. Medline has mesh terms, which are unique to Medline, and keyword searches. So mesh terms are just words that have been attributed to an article when it's uploaded for cataloging so that you can pull it through. Scopus uses keywords only. It doesn't have its own mesh terms. So you would think, or theoretically, if you searched Medline with the same keywords as you searched Scopus with, you shouldn't get any different hits, but you might get more in Medline if you use your mesh terms as well, because they're both using the same basis of the US National Library. The other thing to note here is that it's a US National Library, and you will notice that coming through in the sort of the hits that you're getting. So, I mean, gynae, for example, the spellings and things that I work obviously a lot in that field, the spellings can be very different, the more Americanized spellings. But there's lots of things built in that so that it will, even if you forget that, it will help you out there with pulling things through. But another thing to note in the US Library of late, and there are warnings about this, is to how this is more recent development, how genders and other diversities are coded within this National Library because of political changes going on in the US at the moment. So nothing we'll always caution you when you do the search, but it's just something to be aware of if the researcher that you're interested in is very interested in diversity hits. So other things to note, your institution will have its own paid platform. So again, this used to really throw me when I started because I thought, well, oh my God, is Ovid like another database? But Ovid is essentially like a Netflix subscription, okay? So the library have paid to use this, and within that you get Medline, Embase, and Psych info. I don't know why I haven't put that in there, sorry. So you get all three of these within your Ovid subscription. Other unis might have different things and or different subscriptions, to continue the Netflix metaphor, but whatever they have, just get yourself familiar with, but really think critically about what you are getting from each one. Each one has a slightly different flavor. So the ones that I've got up here, Clinell works more on your allied healthcare professionals. ERIC is our sort of education type setup. Excuse me, and really think about and you can Google what their focus is, and they're going to pull more heavily through papers. Clearly, PsycInfo is more psych based. They're going to pull more hits through, and don't just do it blindly. You could take your search strategy and run it in all of these databases, but that would be again research waste. You're going to get lots of duplication, and you need to be thinking rather than just blindly doing. The other thing you need to think about is the fact that it would be lovely if everyone just sang the same language, but they don't. So whatever search strategy you have, and depending on where you start, I tend to start on Medline just because that's where I'm familiar with. You will design a search strategy and then you will run it out to these different databases, but you will have to adapt it. So for example, Medline has the mesh terms that we've talked about. It would be beautiful if those mesh terms existed in Embase as well, but they don't. It has its own language, or it has its own equivalent of mesh terms. Called Emtree if anyone was interested. But they aren't the same. So you have to run it through and pull out what the mesh terms would be in there. Your keywords are your keywords, and they can run throughout anything. But in order to get a really, really robust, solid search, you're going to want to add in those different mesh terms if the database that you're using is suitable for that. They've also got the different wildcards, which is the different ways that you would potentially search sort of for plurals, or like gyne with the A and the E, and they all are different for different databases. But again, this is getting into the real semantics, but just know your databases is the hit here. Right, inclusion and exclusion criteria. So we've come full circle here into number 6. And again, I've just put some examples up here, but this is going to be very, very dependent on what you are looking for, okay? And you need to agree these, okay? And you're going to include them in your protocol, but again, this might be an area that you might deviate from your protocol. I can't remember what I put in here. So some people put the inclusion and then the exclusion would be separate, but I would argue, I remember putting this up last year and thinking, well, a cadaver is a human, not a live human, but it is a human. So, you know, you be careful with how you lay this out. Now, this isn't going to get applied automatically. There are some sort of AI enhanced search things. Again, like I said, technology not my area, so I haven't used them, and that can apply inclusion, exclusion. But here we're about learning and about learning to do this well for when the computers leave us. So we need to learn how to apply inclusion and exclusion criteria. My advice would be, if you're working within a team, certainly, but even if you're working on your own, to apply your inclusion and exclusion criteria, and then meet with your supervisors or meet with the rest of your team and think, is this working? You know, so don't do the full 5,000 papers before you come back and think, oh, we're missing anything here. Do it, see if everyone's singing from the same hymn sheet and applying them in the same way. And then if you need to make any amendments, then you've only got to go back and do the first 100 or whatever you decided was your first set to analyze before you go back, before you had to do it all again. And any changes made, you would reapply to the first 100, and then you can move forward. But always meeting, collaborating, talking through the decisions you made is really helpful. Literature reviews can be really lonely when you're doing them on your own, and sometimes having that little friend to say, would you exclude or include this, is really helpful. Right, so that's the end of design. We're now moving on to conduct. So how would you conduct your review? This is the Prisma diagram. You'll all be familiar with these from when you read your research papers. My biggest advice would be to keep a record of this. It doesn't have to be in this format, in a Word document, in a spreadsheet, whatever you want to do, but keep a record of this, because if you lose track of it, it is a nightmare to put back together. You have to essentially go back to when you had track of everything and go from there, especially if you've got multiple reviewers, because then they might have multiple sets, and trying to work out if they're double screening and things, where things have gone, believe me, from experience, is a nightmare. So just keep track of this and constantly check in to make sure you've got what you think you should have in terms of numbers. Because the first thing a reviewer is going to say is, if this doesn't add up, you need to go back to the drawing board and work out why it doesn't add up. I can't actually see you for this little sign. So these are, you'll have all been familiar with these, but these are the findings that you get through database searching. Scoping reviews offer a lot more flexibility than systematic reviews, so you can do backward-forward citation searching. If you wanted to find additional sources, you would probably do that lower down the line, because you would definitely do it lower down the line for the papers that you've included. It's up here. Some people add that in up there. You can do additional targeted searches, and you can add them into your pile. But as long as this is transparent, and as long as everyone can follow this through and work out what you've done. Oops, daisies. And then you're going to end up with your final studies. Right, I've put EndNote in there because when I first did this slide 3 years ago, I used EndNote. I do not use it. Me and EndNote are falling out now. That's not a disrespect. EndNote, if it works for you, that's fine. I have moved on to... Why are these slides not working? I have moved on to Zotero. I find it much more intuitive, much easier to use. It hasn't failed us as yet. I'm sure we'll have a spat at some point. But I also love it for collaboration. So I work a lot with students, or encouraging students into research and getting students basic research skills. And we can have shared libraries of files, which is really helpful when you're coming to write up together, and you can access that through a web format. I do have the paid version, purely because of the amount of students I was looking after and the amount of papers they had. I sort of exceeded the capacity, but the free version is really quite accessible, and it does hold for, you know, for the normal, if you weren't doing everyone else's research projects as well, you would have enough capacity to do that. On the note of collaboration, again, you can do this in a spreadsheet. You can do it the old-fashioned way. You can do it in pen and paper for me, but as long as you can keep track of what you've got. But I do enjoy Rayhan. It really it's free again. If you're not doing massive reviews, if you've got multiple on the go together, it gets a little bit more restrictive. But there is a paid version. If you have funding for whatever project you're doing. It allows you to double screen together, so you can blind it and say if I've got 3 students that can all be screening, and then I can create samples to cross over so they can double screen, and then I can take a sample of all of theirs so I can double screen to sort of as a check, because again we're in a capacity building educational setup when we do scoping reviews with our students. But again, a really great piece of software to help you along. Extraction analysis, I mean, how do you show an example data extraction tool? It's all going to be very much what you need it to be. So every data extraction tool will start with the same sort of metadata, author, title, journal, date, etc. And then depending on what you want to answer your question will be the data you pull. So 2 provisos here. Do not extract everything. You only extract information that you are going to synthesize and use. And yes, there'll be inherent wastage there, because yes, you'll get the end and think, I thought that was really important, but now actually I'm not going to use that column. But certainly don't go through and extract sort of every minutiae from a paper, because you will drive yourself insane. The other thing I would say there is trial it, like everything else, pilot it. Just like I said with the in the first instance with the screening, pilot your data extraction tool for your first 50 papers, or not 50 papers, that would be too many, 10 papers, and see if it works. Come together as a team. I always have a notes column at the end, or an extra column, or other whatever, and if you've got consistently the same things in there, then you need a column for that, okay? And then you can add that in, and again, that will mean you'll have to revisit the 10 papers you've screened, but it will save you some time if you get the end of your 50 papers and think, oh, I'm gonna have to go through and read them all again. What have I written here? Data extraction tools is designed to use to pull out it. So you're going to take every paper or source, because again, in a scoping review, we've got that little bit more flexibility. You can add in your grey literature here. Some people find it easier to have a different extraction tool for grey literature, because again, you're not going to ask the same questions of a website. Like, it's not going to be a study design or quant, or sample size, etc., than it is for a paper. So some people find it easier to have that, or they have it on the same spreadsheet and they just sort of grey it out and add in different columns for grey literature. So whatever you want to do within your team, or whatever helps answer your research questions, do that. It is iterative. So if you come to halfway through and you think, you know what, would never thought of this as a concept, because again, if you knew all the answers before you started, there'd be no point in doing this. You are going out to find new information, to seek new ground. So if you get halfway through and you think, actually, this is important, I wish I'd started thinking about this at the start, then you can go back, you can revisit. You will have all these papers downloaded at this point, so you can read them and access them. Okay, writing the report. So when you've pulled all this together in your data extraction tool, that is not the end, okay? What you need to do then is to synthesize. So this is where the exciting things happen, okay? You're going to bring it together in the analysis, so it sort of comes into this section as well, but you're going to bring it together to answer your questions and structure a coherent argument. But you want to create a useful and usable contribution to the literature. You do not want to say paper 1 said this, paper 2 said that. You want to mix it up and bring it out and pull the arguments together to make something greater than the sum of its parts, like I said at the end. It needs to clearly identify gaps in the literature and areas that would govern where you are going next with this. Right, this is about impact. Probably could have been a better picture, but this is about packing a punch with your impact. And I've put in the title and then the after, but then I've put in the notes, actually, this is impact, or where you're going, like I said right at the start, is something you should be thinking about from the start. Why are you doing this? Where's it going? What is it going to help? What is it going to aid? And you want to be thinking about that at the beginning, during, and the after. But obviously it does come to its fruition after, when you've got your sort of finished article, or your finished argument, or your finished recommendations, etc. Use your stakeholders here wisely. The Augustine and O'Malley paper that I quoted for scoping reviews right at the start, they encourage the use of stakeholders. It's actually their 6th step in scoping reviews. It is optional, it doesn't fit for everything, but personally I've found their use really beneficial to helping you guide where you're going to take your research next. Stakeholders are often people who work in the area, so what you don't want is your ivory tower academic outcomes where someone on the shop floor says, well, it's just not going to work. That's not, that's not going to be meaningful for us. But they can help you guide that, but they can also help you put out things to the wider population. So your stakeholders might be patients, there might be policyholders, there might be people who write curriculum or whatever it might be, but they can help take your results and make them count. Because the worst thing that can happen for research is it just sits and stagnates. Okay, it's then useless, it's meaningless, you've wasted your time. It needs to be out there and it needs to be doing something. Right, I have got a breakout activity here, but what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to pause, I'm going to unshare, I don't know if that's a word, and I'm going to open to questions. Oh, Hugh just popped back up. You can put your camera on, you can turn your camera off. I'm easy as to whatever makes you most comfortable. Is there anything in the chat to start with, Hugh?
We do have a question in the chat, Heidi, and that's whether you used Covidence, and if you got any preference between Ryan and Covidence. My answer was I've only used Ryan, which I find very user-friendly, but I have no experience of Covidence.
And neither do I. So it wasn't covered by Hugh and I both work for Newcastle University. Not that Ryan's covered, but I believe it's covered in. It's a paid subscription, I feel, but I might be wrong. Whoever asked the question, you can turn your mics on. I'm always open to convo. But I've never used it. I've been happy. I've been familiar with Rayan. But you guys might be more tech savvy than me, and it has features that you like. What Rayan is available through our uni. There you go, Jane. That's if it is. I don't know. I've never used it. What Rayan does have, and I probably don't even use all the facilities Rayan has, in that it. You can data extract in Rayan, you can do full text screening in Rayan. I use it for its predominant collaborative activities at the start when you screen and double screen, and then I tend to extract into Excel and have papers. Some of that will be because I do a lot of teaching, like I said, and developing students, and that you know, it's easier for me to supervise that if I've got everything in front of us. But again, that probably reflects my own unfamiliarity with the software. So Jane, I don't know if you've used that and you feel like you want to put your camera on or mic on and answer the or give us an insight into Covidence, because I've never used it. If he's not, that's putting Jane on the spot. That's not fair.
No, that's okay. I'm happy
there
to
you
speak. Yes, I've used it for a scoping review, and yeah, we uploaded all our articles and then we screened them, and then you can put in all your kind of what do you call it? Your what you extract. Yeah, so you extract it, and so we used it for that. I haven't used Rayan, so I don't know what it does, but Covidence, that was the first time I've used it, and I found it really good, and it was very straightforward to use, and we used it with a team of people. So
good. So potentially both as good as each other,
similar.
but
yeah,
no one's. Has anyone got any negative views on Covidence or Rayan? Maybe that might be a way. Negative experiences. Tox, was that? Feel free to just ask.
Yeah, I think so I used, so I'm just trying to sort out my camera. I used Covidence for a Cochrane thing, and it was really good, but it wasn't free after that, so it was only for that project.
Fine.
But Rayan was I quite like it.
Yeah, and I did have a convo with one of my external supervisors is from Oxford, and she was keen on Covidence, but they use it all the time because I think it's supported. So Jane, you've surprised me with the it is free here. So I just basically check out what your institution has and have a bit of experimentation. Like I said, I used EndNote when I first started at the uni because that's what I'd used when I was an undergraduate, like 100 years ago. And then I had got really cross with EndNote, and then so one of my colleagues said, "Oh, have you not used Zotero?" And initially I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna have to learn something new," and I'm already got me references from my PhD. But actually, I've never looked back. It's incredible, Zotero. I couldn't recommend it strongly enough. I don't have any conflict of interest there. They're not paying us to say that. Any other questions?
There's another question there about, although it might be see the previous slides. What are the pros and cons of scoping versus narrative review?
Oh, I think it depends what you're trying to what question you're trying to ask. So it comes to that. So I've used scoping reviews for if you what you're trying to get an idea. It's scoping slightly different than mapping, although there is a lot of crossover there, and depending on who you ask, depends on the definition you'll get. But your idea with scoping is you're looking at the breadth and the depth of medical literature predominantly. Yes, you can bring in grey literature and things, but the narrative and the way I've used it, but again, you can take, everyone will have a slightly different interpretation, is it's different disciplines effectively. So you've got anthropology, history, and you can use that. So that the one that I was writing up this morning is about male contraception. So it was using a historical narrative to understand where we are in medicine. So it depends what question you're trying to answer. Does that help?
Yeah, I was going to say it depends a lot on the question you're trying to answer. Is exactly what I would say to that as well.
Nega, do you have your hand up? And then
Uh, Hi everyone. I thank you so much for your comments on the I mean on both Ryan and Covidence. I always worked with Ryan in my projects, but recently I've started working with Covidence as well. But since this is the first time that I'm working with this one, so it's a little bit I guess I mean it's good in general, but I guess Ryan is a little bit more user friendly. So I just wanted to ask your opinion on this, and thank you so much for your informative support. Thank you.
no problem, thank you. And yeah, I think we've talked. I think it's probably familiarity, if I'm being honest. And I think you've probably highlighted that there. What you get used to, what you get using, and unless there's a problem with it, like me and a node, you'll probably not jump ship. I just saw something flash up in the chat about scoping, about Prisma. Now, other alternatives. There probably are, but what I would say is if you're going to try and publish, they'll ask you for a Prisma. There's two. See, there's the Prisma chart, like you know, how many have you screened, how many have you reviewed, yada yada yada, down to you, how many have you included, and then there's your Prisma checklist, which is a really good resource to find. The links will be in the slides when you get them, and that is great. Lots of journals ask for that now because it's essentially a way of checking that you've definitely met all the criteria for a scoping review. And I find that really useful at the end when you, as a checklist, essentially before you submit. And I've often, with the last two I've submitted it with them. It's my checklist, but you know, some of them like it. Some one journal asked for it, and I thought actually this is a really nice method of making sure you have dealt with all of the nuances that would make this a scoping review. So is there an alternative? Probably. You can adapt it. You can take a Prisma and you can add different. I love an adaptation. So you can certainly add different rows if you've done different things in terms of your grey literature. And as long as it adds up and it makes sense to you and you can justify the changes you've made, you know, all's well. There was something else that popped up there. Sorry, Prisma. I need to write my literature review chapter for my PhD thesis, having already done lots of the research. Do you have any hints or tips? Sensible, Hazel, because you're right. So where I started was I started writing the literature review, like many people do for their PhD, to sort of guide where I was going, which then turned into Hugh's laughing because he's one of my examiners, which then turned into a massive piece of work on its own. So it then turned into a scoping review, which isn't a literature review in a sense. So this is like takes us back to our first slide. A literature review for an introduction to a thesis can be like your review, like an introduction to a paper. You're essentially presenting bits of information to present your argument. Okay. What I've ended up with is, well, I've got that introduction in terms of, you know, the general background, if you like, but then I've got a scoping review of the whole. So my PhD is in obstetric emergencies, of learning in obstetric emergencies, as an overview, and I've used that to focus down where I took my realist work after that. So it depends how you justify it, and like everything in a thesis, is to your argument. So as long as you sit there and you can defend why you've done it, you know, job's a good one. So have I got any hints for this? If you've already done a lot of the research, I would suspect that you've already set up your argument. So probably just do a review of the literature reviewing the literature in the sort of use the literature to justify your position and your argument and your background, rather than then broaching into a full literature review. However, my caveat to that would be check out what your institution wants for that. Does that answer your question? You can give us a thumbs up.
I'll just talk.
Oh, there you go.
It's much easier. Thank
I
you
know
very much.
I'm not good at reading quick, so anyone who wants to talk, that's fine by me.
Yeah, no, I think I'm just procrastinating because I applied for funding. So I've crafted an argument. I don't know. I want it to be good and it's making me slow at getting it done.
Oh yeah, I can share that with you. I'll share your in there. But I don't think a scoping review, from my experience, is going to make it any quicker, because you're then going to be going back to your sort of methodical, you know, search strategies to make that robust. Or then what you'll end up doing if you try and do it in the middle is given a not quite a scoping review, but not quite a review. So you've probably already got it by the sounds of things. And then I would maybe just beef it up with a bit more, you know, give a counter view. If you want to go out there and do some targeted searches to sort of give it a little bit more oomph, would probably be my best advice there.
Thank you.
Anyone else got a question, or everyone want to dash for some lunch before they go? Oh, I had an activity, but we've only got 15 minutes left now. So unless anyone's desperate to do the activity, essentially the activity is a paper or a question. It's just a question actually. And the activity was, how would you break that down into the synonyms and concepts that you might use to search? But I've got the final paper, and it's not my paper, I just stole it off the internet. I've got the paper and the search strategy, which were both published. So I'll give them to you when you get your slides, and you can work through it yourself and you can challenge yourself to see what you think. But it's always nice to see someone else's working out, and I found that really useful when I was starting, even down to the fact that some people publish, you know how I said the wildcards might be different, or the adjuncts might be different, how you sort of combine things might be different, and it's really nice if someone's published a search strategy just to test your thinking and make sure you are doing it right. But again, access your librarian, because they'll check the sort of syntax of your search strategy. And don't trust your databases, because sometimes you'll put it in and you think, oh, I've obviously done it right because it's come back with hits, but actually it isn't looking for what you think it's looking for. And then when you tighten it up with your librarian, you do get the proper sort of full remit of hits. Anyone else want to ask anything? Oh. Oh, that's a £1 million question, isn't it?
How long is a piece of string?
What? Too long would be my answer. So, too long when you do it on your own. I think personally, literature review should be a group activity. I think it's really boring. It's really mind-numbing. I think we're not, you know, this unbiased research thing, and I think there's more joy in doing literature reviews which involve reflexivity, so involve sitting down and talking about what you've found and what you've seen and what that means. And I had a fabulous literature review that I've just submitted yesterday that I did with some students over the summer, which looked at midwifery workforce. So they're just 2 undergraduate medical students. Obviously, I'm an obstetrician, so interested in midwifery workforce, and sort of our bigger program of work at University at Newcastle is workforce focused. But it was so exciting to me to see the different views that they brought. So one of the students, his dad worked in the UN, so he's been in it was an international review. He saw things in the literature that I would have just never seen. And obviously I brought the clinical slant to that because I've worked and I can interpret things through that lens. So bringing that together and really being reflective. And when I wrote up that section for the paper, I just thought this is a really nice way of doing things that just adds a richness and really came out with something that I'm really proud of when it's finished. So if you want to do a quick and dirty review of the literature where you're just sort of finding things to justify your argument, then you can do that pretty quickly on Google Scholar. If you want to do a literature review, a really robust, you know, stab at it, that's you know, you're transparently presenting all of your search strategies, the quickest I've done it is probably that one, because we did it over the summer, so maybe it's 12 weeks from start to end, so not loads of time. But those students, we have a system where the students get paid for working on projects, so they worked on that full time and I worked on that. I had a few other things on the go, but quite a lot. And that was a scoping review. A realist review, people will tell you, will take about 12 to 18 months, and that's a full-time person. Thank you so much. I'm not very good with words. I'm going to say your name wrong, so I'll not try. But thank you so much. If anyone needs to go, I appreciate you've got busy jobs and lives. So I hope that answers your question, Lena. So it's very variable.
And I think it is the $1 million question, really. And I think it may well, we're very, you know, we're all healthcare professionals as well as doing the research. So a lot of it just depends on the pragmatics and actually how much time you've got. So if you're doing it, even as a PhD, you know, you then have to decide if you're going to do a full systematic review. That is going to be one of the phases of your PhD, and that's going to be, you know, could be a third of your PhD. So even that you're not necessarily definitely going to do, because it depends whether that's what you want to use a third of your time to do. On the other hand, for every project, you'll need to do some sort of lit review. And a lot of it then just depends on how much time you have. And actually, we'd be lying if we didn't say that some of the process is a bit boring. Is that fair enough to say, Heidi?
Oh, boring
So
as, yeah.
even if you do it as a group and you're really interested in the topic, some of the time it's a bit boring. So some of it is just thinking, is that what I want to spend some of my time doing? And sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes the answer may be no. So we can be very honest about just the pragmatics around it as well.
But you can also challenge yourself, Hugh. So when I did my scoping review for my PhD, which was far too big, I had to, sometimes if you've got a really boring activity, you're going to say, right, I'm going to get 20 done in the next 20 minutes. This is just for screening.
Yes.
And then I'm going to beat that in the next hour, but I'm just really sad. So compete with yourself. But I would never do that again. I did that for my PhD, and obviously because it was for my PhD, I had to do it myself. But since then, collaboration is the way forward.
Yeah.
Can't say it strongly enough.
Yeah, and I guess the other argument is some of it is actually just quite fun and interesting. So when I've supervised people and gone through, a couple of hundred papers, that sort of thing, it's actually quite fun seeing what's out there and what people have said and what people have done. And it really does give you, the whole process just gives you amazing insight into that specific area, and you will become one of the international experts on that specific area. So when it's done for the right reason, in the right place, it's really invaluable. Thank you. Thanks very much indeed, Heidi. I will waffle for the next minute or two and round up. So if anyone's got other questions, then feel free to pop them on the chat box. But thanks, Marta. She's put up the list for the future webinars in the chat box. And if you click on there, you can find the email address as well. And so, which Marta's also put up in the chat box. So if you require a certificate or would like to feedback to us positively or constructively, then feel free to as well. One thing I forgot to mention in the intro was this was a Getting Started series, which obviously from the name is for relative novices, but I think some of you are probably more than novices from some of the questions, which is great to have you. But do look up on the website, because this isn't the only thing that we offer as an incubator. This is kind of the novice level, but then we've got other series and webinars and sessions for more, I suppose, mid-career education researchers, and then also those of you who may be supervisors or thinking about supervision. There's a course and some series for you as well. So have a look on the website. The aim of the incubator, it's funded by the NIHR nationally to try and encourage more clinical education research. So we are just simply clinical education researchers who are trying to encourage other people at whatever level. And if you'd like to be involved in the network, then again, sign up via the website. Would be great to have you. The slides will be up in the next week or two on the website, so do have a look. And last year's slides, which are very similar, if Heidi doesn't mind me saying, are also already up, so you don't need to wait for this set of slides. They're already there for your convenience. Feel free to
only because last year's got such great feedback, Hugh. I thought, why change something that worked? I'm going to answer Lena's question. I'm going to interrupt you very quickly because she's asked a really poignant question. Is there a point where you stop looking at the new literature? And I think that's a really philosophical question, isn't it, in research? Because whatever you produce is almost outdated and I had to draw a line there really quickly because I knew there was a new paper that had come and I thought, oh, I've already done the synthesis. But you have to just draw a line and say, well, that's it. And I'm writing up at this point and I'm publishing. And that doesn't mean the world won't keep on turning and new research will keep coming out, but hopefully what you've produced in terms of your synthesis will stand on its own, unless there's a bit of research that comes out that fundamentally disagrees with everything you've just said in that. But generally speaking, if you've taken 5,000 papers and then reduced them down to a synthesis of 50 papers and one comes out, it would usually mirror in with what you've said. So I would say that was a pragmatic decision, Lena. I think you just have to draw your line in the sand. It's usually time, money, or a combination of both to say, that's what we're done. We're done now, get that out, and then start on the next piece of work. And then that extra literature will come into the next piece of work.
Yep, that sounds very sensible. Great. Well, thanks everyone for your time. Really appreciate everyone will be busy doing other jobs. So really appreciate your time. Hope that was helpful. And thanks especially to Heidi for a fantastic set of slides. And unless we get any negative feedback, feel free to register this time next year to see the same slides and be reminded of how to do literature review. So thanks everyone indeed for your time, and see you again next month. Have a look on the website for the exact dates, but it'd be really great to have you there. Bye bye for now.
Bye.